Barron Trump's 1600 SAT was meant to crown him the future elite schools, waiting cameras cheering. But Jasmine Crockett changed everything, exposing the secret files that prove it was all a setup. Congress turned into a war zone, the internet went wild. When the truth hits this hard, who's left standing? Stay with us, this is a story worth every second of your time. The U.S. Congress feels less like a hearing and more like a battlefield. Barron Trump walks in slow and smug, clutching a leather folder like a trophy. His voice slices through the silence. Today I will prove my exceptional intellect. Gasps ripple through the room. Reporters lean forward. Across from him sits Jasmine Crockett, steady, sharp, unshaken. Once a lawyer for the poor, now the fiercest voice in Congress. Her back is straight, her hands still, her eyes locked on Barron like a marksman. She doesn't speak yet. She doesn't need to. On the giant screen behind them flashes the topic, educational fairness in America. The air crackles. One side stands for privilege, the other for justice. And as the gavel strikes, America knows someone's legacy will burn tonight. The gavel struck once, the sound cutting the air like thunder. The moment Jasmine lifted her eyes, Barron leaned forward, voice dripping with arrogance. I studied at St. Andrews, he said, every word slow, heavy with pride. My scores have always been flawless. SAT 1600, no debate needed. From Harvard to Princeton, every Ivy League begged me to join, while you, Mrs. Crockett, went to a second-tier school, surviving only because of quota. A sharp murmur rippled through the chamber. Some conservative lawmakers clapped, smirking, as if victory were already his. Cameras swung toward Jasmine, her face calm, unreadable, the silence around her louder than any applause. She didn't rush. She flipped open her thick folder, each page a weapon waiting for its moment. Her voice, when it came, was low, but sharp enough to slice the tension. You said 1600, she asked. The Princeton Review report in 2019 listed your name among students under investigation for SAT fraud, directly tied to the Varsity Blues scandal. The one that shook this entire nation when wealthy families bought their children's way into the Ivy League. The crowd gasped. Every reporter leaned closer. Jasmine tapped a page, and suddenly the main screen behind them lit up. There it was, bold and undeniable. Trump Barron Exam Location, Special Center 2020. The words glowed across the chamber like a confession carved in fire. Barron's face turned crimson. Fake news, he shouted, slamming his palm against the table. I was never indicted. His voice cracked under the weight of fury and fear. But Jasmine didn't even blink. Her tone stayed cold, surgical. Correct. You were never indicted. But according to official College Board records, you took your SAT in a private room with 50% extended time and a simplified test set. The room erupted. Reporters typed furiously. Senators whispered to each other. Somewhere in the crowd, a journalist muttered under his breath, just like the rich kids back in 2019. Barron's jaw clenched. I was given that privilege because of excellence, not cheating, he barked. Jasmine turned toward the cameras, her gaze, steady voice rising, just enough for every microphone to catch. Excellence, she said, or just another child of privilege. The words landed like gunfire. The air grew thick. The entire hearing room was silent, except for the echo of clicking keyboards. She took a breath, then drove the final nail in. Last year, Jasmine said the Supreme Court ended affirmative action. They declared that every student in America must compete equally, no preferences, no exceptions. Yet you, Barron Trump, were given a VIP room, extra time, and a shorter test. Tell us, is that what fairness looks like? The question hit like an explosion. Cameras flashed wildly. Reporters nearly shouted over one another. Some lawmakers lowered their heads, knowing the weight of what had just been said. Barron's confidence cracked his mouth opening, but no words forming. Jasmine stood silent again, her eyes never leaving him. The crowd could feel it, the balance had shifted. Somewhere deep in that chamber, justice was beginning to stir. And as the echoes of her words faded into 1,000 screens across America, the tension promised one thing: this was only the first layer of dust. The deeper truth was still buried, and when it surfaced, Barron Trump would never dare boast of brilliance again. The chamber was still trembling from Jasmine's last words when Barron suddenly shot to his feet. His chair screeched against the marble floor, echoing through the hall. With a triumphant smirk, he pulled out a crisp letter stamped with the crimson crest of Harvard University. He held it high under the blinding lights, waving it for the cameras to catch. This, he shouted, is an official invitation from Harvard. They want me while Mrs. Crockett has never even been noticed by the Ivy League. Gasps and whispers spread through the room. A few conservative lawmakers nodded in approval. Some in the audience even clapped, desperate to believe him. The energy shifted, the arrogance in his grin felt like a victory lap. Cameras zoomed in on Jasmine. She sat motionless, her posture flawless, her expression unreadable. Barron saw her silence as weakness and pressed harder, voice rising like a predator tasting blood. You only got scholarships because they pitied the working-class black community, he sneered. That's not intelligence, that's charity. The words hit like a slap. Several reporters froze mid-type, realizing the insult wasn't just personal, it was poisonous. The crowd began to tilt toward Barron. A commentator on the YouTube live stream whispered, "Maybe Jasmine's cornered this time." In that moment, even the air felt heavy. Every camera turned back to Jasmine. Still, she didn't move. Her hand rested gently on the thick folder, before her fingers tapping, once calm, deliberate. Her eyes lifted cold as steel, meeting Barron's across the table. The silence stretched longer than any speech could, and somehow that silence roared louder than his shouting. No one realized it yet, but that stillness was the calm before the next storm. The silence in the chamber was razor sharp. Then Jasmine Crockett rose from her seat, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. The chair slid back, its faint scrape slicing through the tension. Her voice cut the air like a blade. "Here are my real achievements. LSAT 170 out of 180, graduated top 5% from Howard Law, National Moot Court Champion 2016. Every word hit like a drumbeat of truth. Behind her, the massive screen came alive, a flash of old footage. Jasmine in a courtroom, a young attorney holding her ground before a panel of judges. The caption appeared, "Crockett versus Dallas Housing Authority, 2018, verdict in favor of plaintiffs." She had defended 20 low-income families from eviction and won. The hearing erupted with gasps. Applause thundered through the chamber. Jasmine let the noise settle, then turned slowly toward Barron. Her tone was calm but lethal. "What do you have?" she asked, each word crisp, surgical. "Besides an unsigned letter? A published paper, an academic award, or just the name Trump?" Barron blinked, frozen. His Harvard letter trembled in his hand, the once proud crest now catching the harsh glare of the cameras. He tried to speak, but his voice faltered. "I'm young," he managed. "I still have time. I studied at St. Andrews, a prestigious school you could never step foot in." The audience leaned in, sensing his desperation. Jasmine's eyes didn't move. Her answer came fast, precise, unflinching. "You were born in St. Andrews," she said, voice like polished steel. "And even there you needed a VIP room to take your exam. I came from a public school in Texas, and I fought my way to the national court and won. I fought landlords who tried to throw veterans into the streets. I fought a system built for people like you to win, and I still walked out victorious." The crowd exploded, reporters typing like gunfire, spectators on their feet, clapping, shouting. It wasn't just admiration, it was relief, the sound of truth finally cutting through the fog. The gavel slammed, but the room refused to quiet. Barron's face tightened, red creeping up his neck. He clenched the Harvard letter until it crumpled in his hand. Cameras zoomed in, catching every tremor, every flicker of fear. Jasmine stood still amid the chaos, calm as a soldier who had seen this battlefield before. Her silence spoke louder than any victory speech. Barron wouldn't look at her now. The letter that once symbolized power was nothing but paper. Then Jasmine leaned closer to the mic, her voice low, steady, dangerous. "But the next piece of evidence," she said, "won't be a transcript or a score. It will be living proof, a witness who's about to walk in and end this for good." The crowd froze. Every reporter stopped typing. The air itself seemed to pause. Barron's lawyer paled. Even the chairman's hand shook before he struck the gavel again. But it was too late. The storm had already arrived, and Jasmine Crockett was the lightning at its center. Her last promise still crackled in the air as the gavel came down. The chair banged for order, voice tight, demanding silence. Barron whipped toward his attorney, shouting, "She has nothing, she's just flaunting old transcripts." The lawyer leaned in, lips barely moving, "But she hasn't opened the full file yet. Be careful." The warning sliced the heat but didn't slow the cameras. Every lens stayed glued to Barron's face. Out in the hallway, the press live stream thundered through phones. A host repeated the rumor like a drum beat. Sources say Jasmine is about to call a special witness. Inside, whispers swelled into a tide that pushed at Barron's composure. He rose from his chair, eyes darting to the doors, shoulders coiled to bolt. From the gallery came a sharp shout that pierced the room. He's running away. He froze for a split second, trapped between pride and panic as the gavel hammered again. His attorney grabbed his sleeve and yanked him back into the seat with a hard stare. Barron's jaw clenched. The vein at his temple beat. His hands shook with rage. Across the table, Jasmine touched the file and waited still as a blade before it strikes. The chamber held its breath, a vacuum of silence that made every heartbeat sound like thunder. And then, the door opened. The person who stepped in carried living proof no one could deny. The gavel struck again and again, but the room refused to settle. The lights burned hot, cameras kept flashing, and the air felt like it could explode. Barron leaned toward his lawyer, his voice shaking with anger. "She's lying, she has nothing," the lawyer whispered back. "Then why did the Department of Education just walk in?" Every camera turned toward the heavy wooden doors. They opened slowly, and a man in a dark gray suit stepped inside, carrying a thick folder stamped Department of Education, Audit Division. His name tag read, Michael Grant. Jasmine Crockett didn't move, but her eyes followed him carefully. Grant walked to the witness table, placed the folder down, and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "My name is Michael Grant. I served as a financial officer for the Educational Testing Service from 2018 to 2021. The room went silent. Every microphone seemed to lean closer. Grant continued, "In 2020, the testing service received a transfer of $10 million from the Trump Organization. The payment note said Educational Partnership Grant, but it was not sent to any charity account. It was sent to a private account used for SAT testing." He pressed a button, and the large screen behind him came to life. The details of the transaction appeared in plain black letters: Sender Trump Organization, Holdings Recipient College Board, testing account amount $10 million, purpose special testing accommodations, date April 17, 2020. The room erupted in shock. Reporters gasped, senators whispered, and the sound of camera shutters filled the air. Barron's face turned pale. "That's a lie," he shouted. "It's all fake." Grant ignored him. 2 weeks later, he said a specific student was approved for private testing, extra time, and a shorter exam. The student's identification number was BTR 2220. Every head turned toward Barron. The initials matched. Grant plugged in a flash drive, and another document appeared on the screen. It was an email. The subject line read, "Special Accommodation. Trump Family Priority." The message below said, "All arrangements approved as requested by donor. Keep confidential." The room exploded again. People shouted. A senator slammed his pen on the table. Someone in the crowd yelled, $10 million for an SAT score. Barron tried to stand, but his lawyer pulled him back. Grant raised one last page. "This record is from the Treasury Department," he said. "The payment was flagged as suspicious, but it was cleared within hours. Someone high up in Washington made it disappear." The chairman's voice shook as he said, "These documents will be added to the official record." Jasmine stood slowly, her face calm, her voice sharp. "So this is what fairness costs now. $10 million for privilege, for silence, for a name." Grant started to leave, then paused. He turned to Jasmine. "Congresswoman," he said quietly, "that wasn't the only payment. There was another one. Even bigger." The crowd froze. Jasmine looked up, her eyes steady as the cameras zoomed in. And before the gavel fell, one truth hung in the air: the next revelation would not expose a test, but the hand that bought it. The chamber fell into absolute silence. The lights still burned hot, the cameras still rolled, but the sound had vanished. Barron Trump sat frozen, his face pale, his eyes lost in the chaos he had created. The Harvard letter that once gleamed in his hand now lay crumpled on the table beside him. His lips moved, but no words came. The air around him felt heavy, like the weight of truth pressing down for the first time. Everyone in the room waited not for him to speak, but for Jasmine Crockett to finish what he could not. Jasmine rose slowly, her movements steady and deliberate. The hush deepened. She looked at Barron, then at the audience, her voice clear, strong, and painfully calm. "This is not a story about scores," she said. "This is a story about fairness. Children of working families study all night, fight for every single point, while you took a VIP room and called it talent." The words hit like thunder, rolling through the chamber, bouncing off marble walls. Even the reporters stopped typing. Barron's head dropped lower, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Jasmine didn't stop. "Every student who was rejected, so you could have your advantage, deserves to be here more than you ever did. Fairness isn't a favor. It's a promise." Her voice rose with each sentence filling every corner of the hall. The tension snapped. A single clap broke the silence, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet, the sound of applause thundering like a wave. The chairman struck the gavel, but even he couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. "These records," he said, pausing as cameras zoomed in, "will be transferred to the Department of Justice." The words landed like a verdict. Reporters jumped up, shouting questions into the microphones. The crowd behind the barrier began to chant Jasmine's name. Barron still didn't look up. His lawyer touched his arm, whispering something about leaving quietly, but Barron didn't move until security gently nudged him from his seat. He stood slowly, his shoulders sagging. The lights caught him from every angle, his face hollow, his expression broken. When he turned to leave, he raised one hand to cover his face from the flash of cameras. That single image, the fallen heir shielding himself from the truth, spread across every screen within minutes. By the time he reached the hallway, his name was already trending, with one headline, the symbol of failure. Jasmine watched him go. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She simply gathered her papers, closed her folder, and exhaled, not in relief but in resolve. The hearing was over, but the moment had become history. As she stepped out onto the steps of Congress, the night erupted in flashes of white light. Reporters crowded forward, shouting her name, their voices cutting through the cold Washington air. Congresswoman Crockett, defender of fairness, protector of education. Jasmine raised her hand, once the gesture calm but powerful. Behind her, the American flag stirred in the wind. The cameras zoomed closer as she spoke softly, almost to herself. "Fairness isn't given," she said. "It's fought for." The crowd cheered. The lights kept flashing. And in that moment, beneath the marble pillars and the roar of history, Jasmine Crockett became something larger than a lawmaker. She became the voice of every student who ever fought for a fair chance. The sound of the gavel was still echoing across Washington when the headlines hit every screen in America. The words burned in bold red letters on every front page, every phone, every TV broadcast: SAT secret, the Trump privilege exposed. The scandal spread like wildfire. Within hours, cable news ran, split-screen debates, analysts shouted over each other, and reporters camped outside college campuses. The nation that once obsessed over celebrity gossip was now glued to a story about fairness and fury. Every station played the same footage on repeat: Jasmine Crockett standing tall in Congress the moment she said, "This is not a story about scores, it's a story about fairness." Those words became a rallying cry. Across the country, living rooms turned into war rooms. Parents sat in disbelief as anchors replayed the evidence, the secret testing room, the extended time, the $10 million transfer. A mother in Ohio cried on camera, holding her son's rejection letter. "My kid missed Harvard by 10 points, she said through tears. 10 points. And that boy got 50% more time. Where's the fairness in that?" Her words cut through the noise like truth dressed in pain. Call-in lines overflowed. Radio hosts reported being flooded with messages from parents saying the same thing. "We teach our kids to earn it, not buy it." In Boston, students poured onto the streets outside Harvard Yard. By noon, the crowd stretched for blocks, holding banners that read, "Fair admissions now and end." Privilege testing chants echoed through the ivy-covered walls. Their voices young, raw, and furious. Police tried to block the gates, but more students came from Yale, Columbia, Stanford. News drones hovered above, capturing an ocean of signs and hope. "This isn't just about one name," a student leader shouted through a megaphone. "It's about every kid who studied by flashlight while someone else's family bought a shortcut." The crowd roared in agreement. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, the chaos found its way back into order, or at least into reform. Congress convened an emergency session titled education fairness, and SAT oversight. Lawmakers from both parties demanded answers from the College Board. Clips of the hearing dominated every news cycle, senators quoting Jasmine Crockett's words, analysts dissecting her every line. Even networks that once dismissed her now called her the voice that woke up America. Cameras waited outside the Capitol every day for a glimpse of her. When she finally stepped out, she didn't hold a press conference. She simply said, "This isn't about one man. It's about a nation remembering what equality looks like." Her face filled magazine covers within a week. The New York Times called her the woman who faced power and won. Time ran a cover story titled Jasmine Crockett, the defender of fair education. Hashtags exploded across social media. Fair admissions, now no more donor kids. Crockett for justice. Late-night hosts praised her courage. College counselors across America quoted her during assemblies. Jasmine didn't chase the fame, but the moment made her a symbol whether she wanted it or not. In working-class towns, her story hit even harder. Parents who worked 2 jobs started sharing videos about their children's struggles. A steelworker in Michigan looked into the camera and said, "I can't buy my kid 50% more time. All I can give him is a chance, and now I see that chance was stolen." The clip went viral overnight. Thousands replied with the same message: "We just want it fair." Jasmine's congressional office was flooded with letters, handwritten notes from parents, teachers, and students. Many began with the same words: "Thank you for saying what we've all felt but couldn't prove." Out in the countryside, students from rural schools found their voices too. In Kansas, a young woman stood in front of her school gym and spoke to a local news crew. "I studied in a house where the roof leaks. I used borrowed books. I didn't have tutors or private counselors. But I still believed the system was fair until now." Her story spread across TikTok, gathering millions of views. In the comments, one user wrote, "She's the reason Jasmine fought that battle." Inside Ivy League classrooms, the conversation turned uncomfortably inward. Professors whispered about how many students had quietly benefited from donor admissions. One tenured professor at Yale admitted on live TV, "We've all known about the influence. We just never had the courage to say it aloud. This hearing forced us to face it." A Harvard dean, red-eyed during an interview, said softly, "We built walls with money and called them gates of merit." The words broke across social media like glass. And still the protests grew. Students began a hunger strike outside Harvard's main gate. Parents marched with their children in front of the Department of Education, carrying homemade signs reading, "Fairness is the real American dream." Across small towns and big cities, ordinary citizens began gathering in school auditoriums, discussing what reform should look like. The scandal had become something larger, a mirror reflecting who America had become and who it wanted to be again. Through it all, Jasmine Crockett kept working quietly. She turned down TV interviews, avoided political talk shows, and focused on drafting a bipartisan bill to overhaul college testing transparency. Yet her presence lingered everywhere, on murals painted by students, in songs written by young activists, in 1,000 essays titled, "What Jasmine Taught Me." She had become not just a lawmaker, but a lesson. A journalist from the Washington Post summarized it best during a live broadcast. "What we are witnessing," he said, "isn't just a political scandal, it's a moral reckoning." For the first time in decades, America is asking itself what fairness really means, and it's doing so because one woman stood up in that room and refused to bow to privilege. The story ended not with fireworks, but with understanding, the kind that comes only when a nation wakes up to its own reflection. In classrooms and homes across the country, parents began saying it out loud. Fairness in education isn't a privilege. It's the foundation of democracy. And for the first time in a long time, America listened. Years passed, but the echoes of the hearing never faded. The scandal that had once shaken Washington grew into something larger, a landmark moment in American history. It was no longer just called the SAT secret. In classrooms, in documentaries, and on the pages of textbooks, it became a case study, a lesson in what happens when privilege collides with truth. Universities across the country began to change. Admissions officers who once spoke in whispers now faced the cameras, forced to explain the new reforms. The government created a National Oversight Council to monitor standardized testing. For the first time, SAT and ACT scores were reviewed by an independent board. The private testing rooms were abolished, the loopholes closed, And a new generation of students entered the system under one simple promise: fairness. The first sociology textbook that mentioned it was titled Merit and Myth: The Age of Educational Inequality. Chapter 5 was called the Jasmine Crockett Hearing. It opened with a single photograph: Jasmine standing before Congress, one hand on her folder, the other raised mid-sentence. The caption below read, "Truth is not a weapon of power, but the voice of those denied it." Students who read it decades later would write essays about that day, analyzing not just the political fallout, but the moral shift it caused in a country that had long treated fairness as a slogan instead of a system. Professors called it the moment when the American classroom finally looked at itself in the mirror. From Harvard to Howard, reforms swept through universities like a second civil rights movement. Legacy admissions were reevaluated. Donor-linked enrollment programs were shut down. The testing industry, once untouchable, was brought under federal supervision. Every change carried the same name in its footnotes: Crockett Amendment 2028. What began as one woman's fight in a crowded hearing room had turned into a law that reshaped the nation's concept of merit. Outside America, foreign journalists wrote about it with fascination. The Guardian called it America's quiet revolution against educational privilege. The BBC described it as a case where justice corrected the course of meritocracy. Countries in Europe and Asia began holding their own debates on privilege and access. In South Korea, a government commission cited Jasmine's case during their review of university entrance exams. In France, student groups quoted her words during rallies against nepotism. One banner in Paris read, "La vérité ne s'achète pas," truth cannot be bought. The ripple had become a tide. America, once mocked for its inequality, was now studied for its self-correction. Jasmine's name was translated into other languages, not as a politician, but as a principle. Meanwhile, Barron vanished from public life. He withdrew from every appearance, every interview, every foundation event. The Trump Organization, once proud of its branding, quietly removed his name from its scholarships and outreach programs. But the internet never forgets. Every time a new scandal surfaced, commentators invoked his case as a warning. In classrooms, his name appeared in PowerPoints under one title: The Failure of Privilege. Professors used it not to humiliate, but to teach. Barron Trump isn't a villain, one lecturer told her students. He's a reminder that privilege without responsibility becomes decay. Years later, a journalist found him living in quiet isolation, far from politics, far from cameras. The only quote he gave was short, almost regretful: "I wish I had earned it." That line made the front page the next morning, not as a confession, but as closure. For the world, his story was already written. For Jasmine, it was already history. Jasmine Crockett continued her work, but she never returned to hearings or debates about that case again. She had done what she needed to do. The rest belonged to time. Universities began naming scholarships after her. In 2032, Howard University unveiled the Jasmine Crockett Center for Educational Integrity. Students lined up for hours to attend the ceremony. On stage, Jasmine, now older, her hair streaked with silver, spoke only a few words. "Fairness is not a policy. It's a promise you have to renew every generation." Her speech lasted 4 minutes. The applause lasted 10. Her story became part of popular culture. Documentaries, books, and even short films recreated the congressional hearing that changed everything. One streaming series called the SAT Secret topped charts worldwide. High school students watched it and cheered at the scene where Jasmine faced Barron across the table, calm and fearless. Teachers used it as an introduction to ethics classes. In time, Jasmine's hearing was taught alongside other landmark events: Brown vs. Board of Education, Roe v. Wade, and the Civil Rights Act. Each represented a moment when America chose to confront itself. But her true legacy wasn't in awards or textbooks. It lived in the small changes that rippled outward. Parents began telling their children, "Don't chase privilege, chase truth." Students studying late at night whispered her name like motivation. In towns that once felt forgotten, schools renamed their libraries after her. A mural in Detroit read, "Knowledge belongs to everyone." The same phrase was later carved onto the steps of the Department of Education. One journalist asked her years later how she felt knowing she had become an icon. Jasmine smiled softly. "Icons fade," she said, "but justice doesn't if you keep feeding it." That quote became the opening line of a best-selling biography simply titled The Torch. Critics called it one of the most powerful political memoirs in decades. Even beyond America, her influence lingered. When the United Nations held its Global Education Summit in Geneva, a large screen displayed her image alongside the words she spoke in 2025. Delegates from 50 nations stood and applauded. For them, Jasmine represented something universal, the courage to call out the comfortable lie. "We study fairness," said a Kenyan delegate, "because America taught it through her." Barron's story faded into the margins of history, a footnote beneath a greater truth. His name appeared in lessons, not as a headline, but as contrast privilege that collapsed when met with courage. And Jasmine Crockett, the woman who once stood alone under the blinding lights of Congress, became what history books called the Torch of Fairness. She never sought the title, but it found her anyway. Every generation needs a reminder, and she became one. Her face appeared in classrooms, her speeches printed in civics textbooks. The final page of one high school reader carried the quote that had defined the century: "Scores can be bought, but justice and truth never can." That line, once whispered in the tension of a hearing room, now stood carved into stone at the entrance of the Smithsonian's new Hall of Educational Reform. Visitors touched the engraving as they passed, a quiet reminder that democracy is not built on wealth, but on fairness. And as students walked through that hall, notebooks in hand, one phrase echoed again and again, the same words Jasmine had spoken long ago, under the glare of 1,000 cameras. "Fairness is the light that no privilege can dim." Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.